The sky above the Lavender Valley turned black that summer, not from rain, from wings. A purple field stretched toward the horizon, endless rows of violet beneath a July sun. Then the shadow came, sudden, heavy, wrong. Millions of insects falling onto the blossoms like a curse out of scripture. Across the valley, spray planes roared low over neighboring farms. Yellow bellies trailing chemical mist, farmers shouting into telephones, trucks racing down dirt roads. But one woman stood still, boots planted in the dirt, calloused hands resting on weathered cedar, watching the storm of grasshoppers strip flowers bare in hours. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't call the spray plane. She walked to a wooden gate at the far end of her property, took a breath, looked back at the dying valley one last time. Then she unlatched the gate, and what poured out next made the entire town start laughing. Have you ever watched everything you built start to crumble right in front of you? July 1985. Sequim Valley, Washington. The sky turned black that morning. Not clouds, grasshoppers, millions of them, poured across the valley like smoke spilling from a wildfire, wings beating in unison, bodies crashing into purple blossoms with sickening regularity. The sound alone made people stop mid-step. A dry rattling noise that reminded Linda Miller of rain hitting tin roofs. Except there hadn't been real rain for 7 weeks. She stood at the fence line of her lavender farm, hands resting on weathered cedar, watching the insects swarm across her neighbor's property with mechanical efficiency. The lavender flowers that had glowed violet under summer sun just yesterday now looked ragged, gray, stripped bare in hours. Tiny flakes of purple drifted through the air like confetti at a funeral. Beautiful and devastating. Across the valley, spray planes already roared overhead, yellow crop dusters trailing white chemical mists that drifted on the wind. The smell reached Linda's nose before she even saw the planes, sharp, metallic, wrong. Her neighbors panicked. Phones rang. Trucks raced down dirt roads. Farmers shouted at each other about pesticide schedules and emergency contracts. The whole valley moved with the kind of frantic energy that only comes when livelihoods hang by a thread. Linda didn't move. She just watched. A grasshopper landed on her sleeve. She picked it up between calloused fingers. The insect kicked violently. Its body was the size of her thumb. Strong, aggressive, but its wings were still small, underdeveloped, not fully formed. Linda turned the creature in the light, studied it the way her father had taught her decades ago, looking for the signs that mattered. The signs most farmers missed because they were too busy panicking to actually observe. The wings weren't ready yet, which meant the grasshoppers couldn't fly, which meant they couldn't spread far, which meant there was still time. Maybe. She crushed the insect between her fingers, dropped it to the ground. Then she turned and walked back toward the farmhouse, slowly, with purpose, because the answer wasn't in the spray planes overhead. The answer was something else entirely. Something her father had taught her 37 years ago in Oregon. Something nobody else in this valley would understand. Linda was 53 years old. The years had carved hard lines around her mouth and eyes. Her skin carried the rough bronze of someone who spent more time outside than in any building. Weathered, real, the kind of face that told a story without words. Her hair was brown threaded with silver. She kept it tied back in a tight knot. No fuss, no vanity. Just practicality born from 3 decades of farm work. Her shoulders remained broad despite arthritis creeping into her left knee. The knee she'd injured 2 years back, falling from a tractor during spring planting. It made her limp slightly whenever storms approached the mountains. The pain was constant now. A background hum she'd learned to ignore. She rarely smiled anymore. Not since Richard died, 3 years ago. Cancer. Lungs. 25 years of Marlboro Reds finally caught up with him in October 1982. The worst month of Linda's life. Watching the strongest man she'd ever known reduced to skin stretched over bone, his big hands trembling as he tried to hold a coffee cup. Before that, she'd been different. Louder. Quick to laugh. Always first to volunteer at harvest festivals. But losing Richard had hollowed something inside her. Left her quieter. Slower with trust. The kind of woman who listened far longer than she spoke. Miller Lavender Farm stretched across 180 acres outside Sequim. 120 of those acres dedicated to lavender cultivation. The rest split between equipment barns, drying sheds, living quarters, pasture for the few cattle that remained from earlier days. The farm hadn't always been hers. Richard's father started it. Small operation. 30 acres. After returning from Korea with shrapnel still lodged in his hip, he'd tried potatoes first, then realized lavender survived the dry eastern winds better than anything else in western Washington. Linda and Richard expanded slowly over 25 years, buying struggling neighboring parcels whenever they scraped together enough for a down payment. Each purchase a gamble, each season a risk. But they built something real, something that mattered. The farm was profitable now, on paper, but debt hung around Linda's neck like a chain she couldn't fully remove. $285,000 owed to Sequim Valley Bank. New distillation equipment, irrigation systems, processing machines, all bought on credit with the promise of future harvests paying it back if this season failed. If the grasshoppers destroyed the crop, if the bank called the loans, she'd lose everything. The land Richard's father had cleared with his own hands, the promise Linda had made to Richard on his deathbed. The legacy meant to pass to Ryan someday, all of it, gone. But what nobody in that valley knew was that Linda had already survived losing the love of her life, and she'd made a promise to him. A promise she'd die before breaking. Linda walked into the farmhouse. The kitchen smelled of coffee and toast, familiar. Safe Ryan stood at the counter making more coffee. 26 years old, tall and lean like his father had been. Pale skin that burned red every summer, no matter how many hats he wore. His blonde hair curled slightly beneath the edges of his sweat-darkened cap. Exhaustion sat heavy beneath his blue eyes after weeks of barely sleeping. Unlike Linda, he carried his emotions openly. Worry showed clearly in the way he rubbed his jaw constantly, glanced toward the fields every few seconds as though expecting disaster to materialize. He turned when she entered. They're thick near the southern rows, too. Linda nodded, removed her hat. How bad? Worse than yesterday. Donald Thomas already hired another spray plane this morning. Linda walked to the window, looked toward the eastern sky where a yellow aircraft buzzed low over distant lavender fields. White chemical mist drifted behind it like poisoned smoke. Donald Thomas owned the largest lavender operation in the valley, nearly 1,800 acres. Enough to influence almost every farming decision made in the county. At 48, Donald looked more like a banker than a farmer. His black hair remained perfectly combed even during harvest season. He wore expensive denim jackets with polished boots that somehow never seemed dirty. People respected him because success naturally attracts followers, but few truly liked him. Donald had a habit of smiling while insulting people. Years of wealth had slowly convinced him that practical experience mattered less than whatever experts from universities told him. County meeting starts in 40 minutes. Ryan poured Linda a cup of coffee, handed it to her. She accepted it, drank slowly, letting the warmth steady her hands. Then we should get moving, Mom, about what you said yesterday, about the chickens. You're really going to do this? Linda set down her cup. I am, Ryan exhaled. Long and slow, everyone's going to laugh. Let them. What if it doesn't work? Linda looked at her son, really looked at him, saw the fear behind his eyes, the exhaustion, the desperate hope that his mother knew what she was doing. Then at least you'll know I tried something I believed in. Instead of giving up because everyone else said to. Ryan nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He never argued anymore. Because 3 years of watching his mother survive loss had taught him something important. Linda Miller didn't quit, either. The Clallam County Agricultural Extension Hall smelled of burnt coffee, old paper, wet denim. By the time Linda and Ryan arrived, nearly every major lavender grower in the county sat crowded into folding metal chairs. Maps of infestation zones hung across the walls. Fear moved quietly through the room beneath forced conversations and nervous laughter. At the front stood Timothy Clark, county agricultural officer, a narrow man in his early 60s whose silver hair remained combed straight back with military precision. He spoke carefully, formally. Years of dealing with crop failures had made him emotionally distant. He adjusted his glasses, pointed toward the large red circle spread across the county map. The infestation is spreading faster than projections indicated. Aerial chemical treatment begins immediately for all registered farms. Several farmers signed paperwork without hesitation. Donald Thomas leaned comfortably against the table near the front, arms folded confidently across his chest. The kind of pose that said he was already winning. Already smarter than everyone else in the room. Anyone waiting at this point is gambling with their entire season. Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. Linda took a breath, stood up, the room quieted slightly. Heads turned. Curious. Already amused, I'm not spraying. Several heads turned more sharply now. Timothy frowned. You understand the risk here, Mrs. Miller. I do, Donald smirked before speaking. The kind of smirk that said he'd been waiting for this moment. So what exactly is your plan? Prayer? A few farmers chuckled nervously. Linda removed her hat slowly, revealing sweat-flattened hair streaked heavily with gray. "I'm using Rhode Island red chickens." Silence held for exactly 1 second, then laughter exploded across the room. One man nearly choked on his coffee, another slapped his thigh. A woman in the back row covered her mouth to hide her grin. Donald laughed hardest of all. "You planning to entertain the grasshoppers before they eat your farm?" Linda never reacted. Her face stayed calm. "Unreadable. I've got 1,200 birds. I'll move them section by section through the lavender before the hoppers reach full wing stage." Donald stared at her in disbelief. "You think you're running an army?" "No," Linda answered quietly. "I think I'm arriving before the real damage starts." The laughter slowly faded. Mostly because Linda's expression never changed. Mostly because something in her steady voice made people uncomfortable. Deep inside, however, Linda felt the pressure tightening in her chest like wire. If this failed, she would lose almost everything her family had built across 3 generations. The bank already owned part of her future through loans and machinery payments. Another failed season might finish the rest. But fear alone had never guided Linda Miller. Mara did. Because years ago, long before lavender made Sequim wealthy, Linda had watched her father stop an infestation without chemicals at all, and standing inside that noisy room filled with nervous men and chemical contracts, Linda realized something none of them understood yet. The grasshoppers still couldn't fly. She put her hat back on, turned to leave. Behind her the room buzzed with whispered conversations and barely contained laughter. People exchanged glances, shook their heads. Some pulled out checkbooks to sign up for the spray program. Ryan caught up to her in the parking lot. "You okay?" Linda unlocked the truck, climbed in. "I'm fine," but her hands shook slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. Ryan noticed. He didn't comment. He just got in beside her, closed the door, waited. Linda took a long breath, steadied herself. "They can laugh. I don't care. You sure about that?" She turned to look at him. "I care that they're going to fail. I care that their soil is going to die. I care that the chemical companies will use this disaster to push more poison on us next year." But about them laughing? No. "I don't care about that anymore." She started the truck. "What I care about is making sure we don't fail with them." She put it in drive, pulled out of the parking lot. Behind them, the agricultural building shrank in the rearview mirror. Ahead of them lay the work that would either save or destroy everything. Oregon, 1948. Linda was 16 years old, standing beside her father in a field of mint. Green rows stretching toward distant hills. The air smelled sweet, sharp, menthol strong enough to make your eyes water if you stood too close. But that morning the sweetness was ruined. Insects crawled everywhere, thousands of them small, dark, wingless, chewing through the mint leaves with mechanical efficiency. Next door, old man Wilson was already spraying. His tractor rumbled back and forth, chemical mist hanging in the air like fog. The smell of it drifted across the property line, harsh, bitter. Wrong. Linda wrinkled her nose. "Why aren't we spraying like Mr. Wilson?" George White knelt down. Her father was a broad man with thick shoulders and permanent tobacco stains on his fingers. People called him difficult because he rarely agreed with government farming advice. But Linda saw something else beneath the stubbornness. Patience. George scooped up a handful of dirt, let it crumble through his fingers. "You see this?" Linda nodded. "This dirt is alive, kiddo. Got earthworms in here, roots. Billions of tiny creatures you can't even see. They make the soil healthy. Rich, fertile." He brushed his hands clean. "Chemicals kill everything. Not just the bugs, everything. The worms die. The microbes die. The soil turns hard as concrete. Then nothing grows right." Linda watched a beetle crawl across a mint leaf. "But Mr. Wilson's killing the bugs. This year," George stood, pointed toward Wilson's field. "Next year his soil will be dead. He'll need more chemicals. Then more. Then more. It's a trap, Linda. Once you start, you can't stop." He whistled sharp. 300 chickens came running. Rhode Island reds. Deep rust-colored feathers gleaming in the morning sun. They swarmed into the mint rows, pecking, scratching, hunting. Within minutes, the insects began disappearing. Chickens eat the bugs before they grow, before they get wings, before they can fly away and spread. George crouched beside Linda again. "Chickens don't kill the soil, they feed it. Their droppings make the ground better, stronger." Linda watched the birds work, the systematic way they cleared each row, the efficiency that came from instinct rather than instruction. And what if it doesn't work? George smiled at his daughter. "Then we still have chickens. We can eat, sell eggs, stay alive while we figure out plan B. But with chemicals you bet the farm, lose the farm. There's no plan B." That year Wilson's field produced higher yields. George's field produced less. But the following year, Wilson's mint grew weak, stunted. The soil had turned pale and cracked. George's field flourished. Dark green. Healthy, thriving. The lesson stuck with Linda for 37 years. Slow but sustainable always beat fast and destructive. George had died in 1972. Heart attack while bringing in the morning eggs. Quick. Painless. The way he would have wanted. But his lessons lived on in Linda. Lived on in the way she approached every challenge. Now in 1985, standing in her own lavender field with grasshoppers swarming, Linda remembered her father's hands. The way they crumbled dirt. The way they pointed toward the future. The insects were different. Lavender grasshoppers weren't mint aphids, but the principle remained the same. Before they could fly, there was still time. She just had to be brave enough to act on what she already knew. Ryan hammered another fence post into the ground. Sweat dripped from his chin, his shirt clung to his back. Dark with moisture, they'd been working since dawn. Building the system, lightweight wire fencing, 3 feet high, divided the lavender fields into corridors. Each corridor 50 feet wide. Running parallel between the rows, the chickens would move through these corridors, section by section, eating the grasshoppers before they matured. It was simple in theory, brutal in execution. Ryan straightened, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "Mom? You sure about this?" Linda didn't answer immediately. She stood looking out across the fields, purple flowers swaying gently in the breeze, grasshoppers crawling everywhere. The insects hadn't reached full wing development yet, but they would soon. "No," she finally said. "But I believe it'll work." Ryan studied his mother's face, the set of her jaw, the way her eyes never wavered from the fields. He nodded, picked up the sledgehammer, kept working. The math was unforgiving. 400 chickens originally. 800 more purchased in the past week. $2,400 from the savings account. Plus 800 for fencing. 800 more for additional water systems and shelters. Total investment, $3,200. If it failed, it was money they couldn't afford to lose. If it succeeded, it was the cheapest insurance policy in the history of farming. By late afternoon, a truck rolled into the gravel driveway. Dusty, dented, familiar. Michael Johnson climbed out, 60 years old, Richard's younger brother, a carpenter by trade, retired now. His beard had gone completely silver. His hands remained strong, despite arthritis creeping into his knuckles. He pulled a toolbox from the truck bed. "Heard you could use some help." Linda looked up from where she was stringing wire. "You don't have to do this, Michael. I know." He walked to the nearest fence post, set down his tools. "Richard would have done this for me. Now I'm doing it for you." For 4 days, Michael stayed, building, hammering, measuring, adjusting. He refused payment, refused even to let Linda cover his gas, just worked. On the 4th evening, he stood beside Linda, surveying the completed system. The sun was setting, casting its long shadows across the lavender rows. The fencing network stretched across the fields like veins through a body. "You know people are laughing at you." Linda nodded slowly. "I know." Michael scratched his beard. "And if this fails?" Linda was quiet for a long moment. "Then at least Ryan will know I tried." Michael looked at her. Really looked at her. Saw the exhaustion in her eyes. The weight pressing down on her shoulders. "Richard always said you were the toughest person as he ever met." Linda's throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak. Michael clapped her gently on the shoulder. "Good luck, Linda." He climbed back into his truck, started the engine. Before pulling away, he leaned out the window. "I'll be praying for you." Then he was gone. That evening, Linda sat at the kitchen table with Ryan. Silence stretched between them, the kind of comfortable quiet that only exists between people who've spent years together. Ryan pushed his plate away. The bank called again today. Linda's jaw tightened. "What did they say?" "Edward Harris wants to schedule a meeting. Said something about reviewing the loan terms." Edward Harris. Bank manager, 55 years old, with a voice like cold steel and eyes that calculated risk down to the penny. Linda had dealt with him for 15 years. He'd been polite when Richard was alive, even friendly. But after Richard died, Edward's tone changed, became more formal, more distant, as though a widow alone couldn't possibly manage a farm this size. "When?" He didn't say. Just said you should call him. Linda stared at the table, at the scratches and stains accumulated over decades. This table had been Richard's grandmother's, solid oak, built to last, just like the farm, just like the promise she'd made. The night Richard died, he'd gripped her hand with what little strength remained, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't sell the land. Promise me." Linda had promised, and she intended to keep that promise, even if it killed her. Ryan watched his mother's face. "We don't have to do this. We could spray like everyone else. Get the loan extension. Play it safe. Linda looked up at her son. Safe is how you lose slowly instead of all at once. I'd rather bet on something I believe in than trust chemicals that might destroy the soil for years. Ryan nodded. He'd expected that answer. His mother hadn't taken the safe path a single day in her life. 2 days before the chicken release, a pickup truck slowed near the Miller property. Donald Thomas's truck. 2 of his workers sat in the cab, staring at the fence network running through Linda's lavender fields. The strange contraption that looked more like a maze than a farming system. One of them pointed, Laud, the other shook his head. They drove off still laughing. Ryan stood near the equipment barn, hands clenched into fists, face flushed red. I'm so sick of this. Linda walked over, placed a hand on his shoulder. Doesn't matter what they think yet. Yet, the word hung heavy between them, because Linda knew the truth. If this worked, people would call her a genius. If it failed, they'd call her a fool. And right now, the entire valley was betting on fool. Ryan kicked at the dirt. How do you do it? How do you just stand there and let them mock you like that? Linda thought about the question carefully, because anger doesn't fix anything. Pride doesn't either. The only thing that matters is whether the chickens eat the grasshoppers before the wings come in. Everything else is just noise. It bothers me, though. I know it does. It should bother you too. Linda looked at her son, saw the frustration, the protective instinct, the desire to defend his mother against people who didn't deserve her time. It used to bother me. When I was your age, it would have killed me to hear them laugh. But you learn something when you survive long enough. You learn that the people who mock are usually the ones most afraid. They laugh because if you succeed, it means they made the wrong choice. And nobody wants to admit they made the wrong choice. Ryan considered that, so they want us to fail. Some of them. Yes, that's awful, it's human. Linda turned back toward the fields, and it's why we can't lose. Because if we lose, we don't just lose the farm. We prove them right. We give them permission to keep poisoning the land, to keep doing things the easy way that destroys everything good about this valley. Ryan nodded slowly, understanding finally settling in. So this isn't just about us. No, it never was. That night, Linda couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the grasshoppers outside. The sound of them eating never stopped. A constant low rustling like wind through dry leaves. Her mind wouldn't shut off. $285,000. The bank could foreclose if this season failed. Ryan was 26, should be starting his own life, not sacrificing his future to save his mother's farm. If she lost this place, she'd lose everything. The land, the legacy, the promise to Richard, everything. At 2 a.m, Linda gave up trying to sleep. She dressed, pulled on her jacket, walked outside. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting silver light across the lavender fields. The purple flowers looked almost white in the moonlight. Beautiful, fragile. Grasshoppers crawled everywhere, but they still couldn't fly, not yet. Linda stood in the middle of her farm, alone under the stars, and for the first time in 3 years she prayed, not for success, not for wealth, just for enough to keep the promise, enough to save the land, enough to prove she wasn't crazy. The stars didn't answer, but the silence felt almost like a yes. The morning of August 1st arrived cold and misty. 5 o'clock, Linda and Ryan stood beside the chicken enclosure, their breath visible in the pre-dawn chill. 1,200 Rhode Island Reds filled the temporary holding pen, a sea of rust-red feathers shifting restlessly. The birds clucked and scratched at the ground, anticipation rippling through the flock. The flock looked almost unnatural together in the early morning light. More than 1,000 birds shifting in waves of deep rust-red feathers, their yellow legs scratching constantly at the dirt, while their sharp eyes searched every inch of ground around them. Linda had spent nearly 6 years building this bloodline carefully, selecting stronger birds each season. Rhode Island Reds survived cold weather well, resisted disease better than most breeds, and most importantly hunted aggressively once released into open ground. Ryan's hand rested on the gate latch. You ready? Linda took a deep breath, nodded. Ryan pulled the latch. The gate swung open. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the chickens exploded forward. A living wave of red feathers and yellow legs surged into the lavender corridors. The sound was enormous. Wings flapping, claws scratching dirt, constant clucking echoing across the fields. Dust rose in clouds. The morning light caught it, made it glow. At first, the movement seemed chaotic, random, uncontrolled. But within minutes, the flock began to organize itself. The chickens spread naturally through the rows, forming loose feeding waves, moving systematically between the lavender plants. their heads bobbing constantly. Pecking at the ground beneath the purple blossoms, grasshoppers burst upward everywhere, only to vanish instantly into sharp beaks. The sound changed, no longer chaotic, steady now, relentless, like heavy rain moving slowly across dry land. A black and white border collie trotted beside Linda through the rows. The dog's name was Ash, 8 years old, pale blue eyes that missed nothing. A scar ran across his muzzle from a coyote attack. 3 years back, age had slowed Ash slightly. His back legs didn't move as smoothly as they once had, but his instincts remained sharp. He moved quietly beside the flock, guiding stray chickens back toward the feeding corridor whenever they wandered too far. No barking, no aggression, just patient, persistent herding. Linda watched the system function. The chickens ate with mechanical efficiency, moving as a unit, devouring everything in their path. Grasshoppers, larvae, eggs, all of it disappeared. Ryan stopped suddenly, crouched beside a lavender plant. "Mom, look at this." Linda walked over. The ground beneath the plant had been covered in young grasshoppers that morning. Hundreds of them, crawling over each other in a writhing mass. Now the soil was clean. Ryan swallowed hard. If these things get wings, they won't. Linda interrupted quietly. She said it with more confidence than she felt, because deep down Linda knew the truth. This only worked if they stayed ahead of the maturation cycle. If the grasshoppers developed wings before the chickens cleared the fields, it was over. For the next 6 hours, Linda and Ryan moved the drift fences section by section beneath the growing heat. Sweat soaked through Linda's shirt. Her knee burned with pain every time she lifted fence stakes from the hardened ground. But she couldn't stop. By noon, something remarkable had become visible. The first completed rows looked different. Cleaner, healthier, alive. The lavender plants no longer crawled with insects. The purple flowers stood upright, undamaged, thriving. Meanwhile, high above the valley, another spray plane roared across the sky, trailing chemical mist over Donald Thomas's enormous fields to the north. Linda watched the drifting clouds silently, then looked back down at the moving sea of red feathers beneath the lavender. And for the first time since the plague began, she allowed herself to believe, maybe, just maybe, the farm might survive. A truck appeared on the road, slowing near the Miller property. Not Donald's this time. Different. The driver stared at the chickens moving through the lavender corridors. His expression unreadable from this distance. He didn't laugh, didn't shake his head, just watched, then drove on. Ryan noticed, people are starting to pay attention. Linda wiped sweat from her face with her sleeve. Let them watch. We've got work to do. They returned to moving fences. The sun climbed higher, the heat intensified, but the chickens never stopped eating. By late afternoon, Linda's entire body ached. Her hands were blistered despite the gloves. Her knee had swollen to twice its normal size. She limped badly now. Ryan tried to get her to rest. She refused. We lose momentum, we lose time. We lose time, the grasshoppers win, so they kept working. Hour after hour, row after row. As the sun began to set, Linda finally allowed herself to stop. She stood at the highest point of the property, looking down across the fields. The lavender glowed purple in the fading light. The chickens had settled into the temporary roosts Ryan had built. Their day's work complete, Ash lay at Linda's feet, panting, exhausted. Ryan climbed the hill to join his mother. He carried 2 bottles of water, handed one to Linda. They drank in silence. Below them, the farm spread out like a patchwork quilt. Some sections still crawling with grasshoppers. Other sections cleaned and recovering, progress slow. But real Ryan finally spoke. We might actually pull this off. Linda didn't answer immediately. She'd learned long ago not to count on anything until the harvest was safely stored and the money was in the bank. But standing there watching the evening light paint the lavender fields gold, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, small, fragile, but present. We'll see, she said quietly, then turned and limped back down the hill toward the farmhouse. Tomorrow they'd do it all again, and the day after, and the day after that, until every row was clean, or until they ran out of time. Whichever came first. The week that followed tested every muscle in Linda's body. Every morning she rose before sunrise, started the coffee, walked outside to check the chickens before Ryan even stirred. The routine became almost ritualistic, a liturgy of physical work that left no room for doubt or fear. The chickens were settling into their pattern. They worked best in the cool morning hours, slowed slightly during the afternoon heat, recovered their energy as evening approached. Linda learned to read their behavior the way she'd learned to read weather. Subtle shifts in clucking patterns, changes in feeding intensity, movement that signaled either success or stress. Ash had taken to the work like he was born for it. Despite his age, the border collie moved between the corridors with quiet authority, guiding strays, maintaining order, his pale blue eyes constantly scanning for problems. By the end of the first week, 3 corridors were completely cleared. The lavender in those sections stood tall and healthy, purple blossoms heavy with oil, the kind of growth that meant premium quality. Ryan calculated production estimates one evening over dinner. If we keep this pace, if the chickens stay on schedule, we could clear the entire field in 6 weeks. Linda set down her fork. That's cutting it close. How close? The grasshoppers will start developing wings around week 8. We need to be done by week 7 to be safe. So 1 week of cushion, if everything goes perfectly. Yes. Ryan rubbed his forehead, and things rarely go perfectly. They don't. But they had to. This time they had to. Because the alternative was unthinkable. A small minor crisis arrived on the 8th day. Linda was checking the western corridor when she noticed something wrong. 3 chickens lying still, not moving, not even scratching at the dirt. Dead. She knelt beside them, examined the bodies. No obvious injuries, no signs of attack. Just dead. Heat exposure. The afternoon temperatures had climbed higher than expected. The shade structures Michael had helped build weren't quite enough for sections of the field that received full sun. Linda walked quickly to the equipment barn, found Ryan replacing a section of damaged fencing. We need more shade. Now. Today, Ryan looked up. What happened? 3 birds dead from heat. There'll be more if we don't act fast. They spent the rest of the afternoon constructing makeshift shade canopies, using whatever materials they had on hand, tarps, lumber, old bed sheets, anything that could block direct sunlight. By evening, every corridor had additional shade. No more chickens died that week. But the close call rattled Linda. She lay in bed that night calculating losses. 3 dead birds out of 1,200 wasn't significant in terms of overall numbers. But it represented a vulnerability she hadn't anticipated. A weakness in the system that could have grown into catastrophic failure if she hadn't caught it in time. The lesson stuck with her. Stay observant, stay flexible, stay 1 step ahead of every possible problem. Because farming wasn't about following a plan, it was about adapting to reality. A passing pickup truck slowed near the Miller property one afternoon, different from before. This driver pulled completely off the road, cut the engine, climbed out, walked to the fence line, stood there watching, not laughing, just watching. Ryan noticed first, nudged Linda's arm. The man was in his early 50s, weathered skin, graying beard, work-worn hands clasped on the top fence rail. His truck was old but well-maintained, the kind of vehicle that belonged to someone who took care of what they owned. After several minutes, he called out, "How many birds you running?" Linda walked closer. 1,200. The man whistled low. Cost? About 3,000 for the whole setup. Birds, fencing, feed. He nodded slowly. His eyes tracked the chickens moving through the lavender rows. The systematic way they cleared section after section. Chemicals would have run me 15,000 this year. Maybe more. He spat into the dust. And my soil's already half dead from the last 5 seasons. Linda said nothing. Let the man think. He pushed back from the fence. You mind if I come by next week? See how it's holding up? Come anytime. The man climbed back into his truck, started the engine. Before driving off, he leaned out the window. Hope it works, Linda. Really do. Then he was gone. Ryan waited until the truck disappeared around the bend. That's the first person who hasn't treated us like we're insane. Linda wiped sweat from her forehead. 1 person doesn't make a trend. We've got 6 more weeks before we know anything for sure. Anything can still go wrong. She wasn't being pessimistic, just realistic. Because Linda Miller had learned long ago that hope without caution was just another word for foolishness. And foolishness was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the Olympic Mountains, Linda stood once more at the highest point of her property. Looking out across the fields she'd fought so hard to keep, the first phase was working, barely, by the narrowest of margins. But working. The chickens had eaten their way through 3 corridors. The lavender there grew strong and clean. The grasshopper populations in those sections were decimated. 6 corridors remained, 6 weeks of work, 6 weeks of holding her breath every morning, hoping the wings didn't come early, hoping the chickens didn't catch some sudden disease, hoping the weather didn't turn against them. 6 weeks of trusting that what her father had taught her decades ago in Oregon would still hold true now in Washington. Linda took a deep breath. The air carried lavender, earth, the faint smell of chickens from the nearby coops. And for the first time since the grasshoppers arrived, for the first time since the laughter at the county meeting, For the first time since Edward Harris's coded threats about foreclosure, Linda Miller felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for a very long time. Possibility. Not certainty, not even probability. Just possibility that maybe, just maybe, this was going to work. She walked back down the hill toward the farmhouse, her knee aching with every step. Tomorrow there would be more fence to move, more chickens to manage, more grasshoppers to destroy. But tonight she let herself hope. Just a little, just enough, because hope was what kept farmers going. And Linda Miller was nothing if not a farmer, through and through, until the day she died. The second week of August arrived with relentless heat. Every morning Linda woke at 4:30, her body screaming protest before her feet even touched the floor. The arthritis in her knee had spread to her lower back, sharp stabbing pains that made her breath catch. She ignored it. Dressed in the dark, scarred coffee, was already outside by the time the sky turned gray. Ryan emerged from his room looking thinner than he had a month ago. Stress had carved hollows beneath his cheekbones. His eyes carried permanent shadows. They worked in near silence now. No need for conversation. The routine had become muscle memory. Meet fences, read chickens, monitor progress, adjust corridors, repeat. By mid-morning the valley heat turned brutal. The kind of dry, scorching warmth that made the air shimmer above the dirt roads. Made sweat evaporate before it could even drip. Linda crouched beside a lavender plant examining the stems. The flowers here looked healthier than they had 3 days ago. Fuller. The purple deeper. Richer. The soil beneath showed no signs of grasshopper activity. Clean. She allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction, then moved to the next row. Because satisfaction meant nothing until the harvest was sold and the bank was paid, Ryan worked 20 feet away from her, adjusting a section of fencing that had loosened during the night. He paused, wiped sweat from his face. "Mom, take a break. I'm fine. You're limping worse today." Linda straightened, tested her knee. The pain shot up through her hip. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." She didn't argue, just kept working. Because arguing took energy she didn't have, and admitting weakness felt like inviting failure. By noon, the system had cleared 4 full corridors. The lavender in those sections stood like soldiers at attention, tall, straight, untouched by the destruction visible everywhere else in the valley. Linda finally stopped, sat on an overturned bucket, drank water from a thermos Michael had given her years ago. The metal was dented, worn, familiar. Ryan joined her. Sat on the ground beside the bucket. "You think we're going to make it?" Linda didn't answer right away. She studied the fields, the chickens working their way through the next corridor. The slow, methodical progress that looked like none and meant everything. "I think we have a chance." "That's not the same as making it." "No, it isn't." Ryan stretched out his legs. "How will we know? When we know we've made it." Linda took another sip of water. "When the harvest is in the barn, when the buyers have paid us, when the bank is satisfied, then we'll know." "That's a long way off." "It is." They sat together in companionable silence, the kind that comes from shared work and shared worry. Mother and son united by something larger than themselves. A breeze moved through the lavender. The purple flowers swayed. The scent rose, sweet, deep, real. Linda closed her eyes for a moment, let herself remember why she'd chosen this life, why she'd fought so hard to keep it. Then she opened her eyes, stood up, got back to work. Days passed. The valley watched. Trucks began slowing near the Miller property more often. Drivers staring through windshields. Sometimes pulling over to observe from a distance. Sometimes calling out questions Linda answered politely but briefly. She didn't have time for visitors. But she didn't turn anyone away either. Because every curious farmer was a potential convert. Every honest question was an opportunity to plant a seed that might grow into something larger later. Word was spreading. The neighbors no longer joked openly about the chicken lady. Now they spoke in whispers, comparing notes, sharing observations, wondering whether maybe, just maybe, Linda Miller wasn't quite as crazy as they'd assumed. The visual evidence was hard to ignore. Across the valley, lavender fields were showing damage, plants stunted, flowers shrinking, soil cracking in pale patches that looked like wounds in the earth. Meanwhile, Miller Lavender Farm glowed deep purple under the August sun, vibrant, alive, unmistakably healthy. One afternoon, a woman pulled up in a Volvo station wagon, out of place among the pickup trucks that usually appeared at the property. She climbed out wearing slacks and a button-down shirt. Reading glasses pushed up on top of her head, she introduced herself as Diane Walker, a local journalist for the Peninsula Daily News. "Mrs. Miller, I'd like to interview you about your unconventional pest management approach." Linda kept stringing wire. "Didn't look up, I'm busy." It would only take an hour. I don't have an hour, Diane persisted. This is a story people need to hear. Other farmers could benefit from learning about your methods. Linda finally stopped working. Faced the journalist. With respect, Ms. Walker, I'm in the middle of saving my farm. If we survive this season, I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Until then, I need every minute of every day to do the work. Diane nodded slowly, understanding settling on her face. When do you think you'll know? September. Maybe October. Depending on harvest timing, I'll come back then. Please do. Diane handed Linda a business card. Climbed back into her Volvo, drove away. Ryan watched the car disappear down the road. That was the local paper. I know. You could have talked to her. Gotten some publicity. Maybe help with buyers when harvest comes. Linda tucked the business card into her pocket. Publicity before success is bragging. Publicity after success is education. I'm not interested in bragging, and we haven't earned the right to educate yet. Ryan considered that. Fair point. The chickens worked on. Another corridor cleared. Another piece of the puzzle solved. But always the looming pressure of time, of grasshopper development, of the window closing between possibility and disaster. Mid-August brought a stench that everyone in the valley recognized but few wanted to acknowledge. The smell of chemical failure. It hung in the air like fog, acrid, metallic, wrong, the kind of odor that clung to clothing and hair. That made eyes water if you stood downwind too long. That seeped into the wooden walls of farmhouses and refused to leave. Spray planes had been running daily for 3 weeks now. Multiple applications per field. Higher concentrations than the labels recommended. Farmers panicking. Increasing dosages. Hoping that more chemicals would solve a problem that more chemicals had clearly failed to solve. The grasshoppers died, yes. That part worked. Dead insects piled in irrigation ditches. Along fence lines. Beside roads. Thick brown carpets of bodies that stank in the sun. Farmers initially celebrated. But after weeks of repeated chemical exposure, the lavender plants themselves began suffering. Linda noticed it first while driving into town for supplies. She passed the Anderson farm, then the Pemberton place, then Donald Thomas's main field along the main road. Something was wrong. The purple had faded. What should have been deep, vibrant violet had become a washed-out gray purple, like flowers viewed through dirty glass. The plants stood shorter than they should. Blooms smaller, less full. The soil between the rows looked cracked, pale, almost white in places where chemicals had killed everything beneath the surface. Linda drove home in silence, pulled into her own driveway, stopped, looked at her fields. Her lavender stood tall and rich. The kind of purple that almost hurt to look at because it was so saturated. The soil between her rows was dark, crumbly, alive with worms and microbes. The contrast was stark, veil from the road, impossible to deny. That evening she sat with Ryan on the porch, watching the sunset paint the fields gold. You see what's happening over there? Ryan nodded. Hard to miss. Donald's going to lose half his crop. Maybe more. He had it coming. Linda glanced at her son. Don't take pleasure in another farmer's failure. That's how we lose our humanity in this business. Ryan looked down at his hands. You're right. I'm sorry. Donald made bad choices. He'll pay for them. But he didn't deserve what's happening. He deserved better advice from better people. He listened to chemical company representatives instead of his own father's lessons. That's a tragedy, not a victory. Ryan absorbed this. You're a better person than I am, Mom. Linda almost smiled. I've had longer to learn. The valley continued its slow collapse. The good farms suffered alongside the bad. Because chemicals didn't discriminate. They killed grasshoppers and beneficial insects together. Ladybugs disappeared. Bees vanished. The pollinators that lavender required died in massive numbers. Without pollinators, the surviving lavender produced less oil, lower quality, lower market value. The economic disaster was just beginning to become visible, and it was visible to everyone. The first big buyer arrived on the 15th of August. Pamela Scott represented a mid-tier cosmetics company based in Portland. 38 years old, sharp green eyes and dark hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun. The kind of person who wore practical clothing because comfort mattered more than appearance during long days driving between farms. She arrived at Donald Thomas's processing barn on a Thursday afternoon. The heat was oppressive, the kind that made metal burn to touch and asphalt go soft. Donald greeted her personally, wearing pressed jeans despite the temperature, polished boots that gleamed. He smiled confidently while workers unloaded lavender bundles nearby. You won't find a larger operation in the county. Pamela crouched beside several bundles stacked near the barn wall, picked up a handful of dried flowers, rubbed them gently between her fingers, brought them close to her nose. Her expression changed almost immediately. Hardened, the oil concentration feels weak. Donald's smile tightened slightly. We had a difficult insect season, Pamela stood. Brushed lavender dust from her palms. There's also chemical residue. Donald folded his arms across his chest. Everything used here passed federal standards. That may be true. Pamela's voice remained perfectly neutral. But our clients don't buy federal standards. They buy purity. She walked back to her car, without another word. By the end of the day, her company had rejected nearly 60% of the contracted harvest from Thomas Farms. The news spread through the valley with frightening speed. 2 days later, another buyer from Seattle rejected multiple farms for similar reasons. Lavender prices across the region dropped 40% within a single week. Fear replaced confidence almost overnight. Linda heard the conversations everywhere now. At fuel stations, feed stores, hardware counters. Farmers spoke in lowered voices about shrinking oil yields and chemical damage they hadn't expected. Some tried to rationalize it, said it was just a bad year, said next season would be different. But Linda saw the worry in their eyes, the way they glanced at their fields when they thought nobody was watching the way. Their shoulders slumped just a little more each day. She was standing in the feed store one afternoon when she overheard two farmers talking near the chicken supplies. They didn't realize she was there. That Miller woman might have been onto something. With chickens? Yeah. Her fields look incredible. Mine look like cemetery dirt. You thinking about trying it? I'm thinking about anything that doesn't involve another loan and another spray plane. Linda quietly paid for her supplies and left without making her presence known. She didn't need credit. She didn't need to be right in front of them. She just needed her methods to work. And they were working. The truth was becoming undeniable. August 12th arrived with catastrophe, 5 in the morning. Linda was moving fence sections near the eastern boundary when she heard it. Not the usual sound of grasshoppers crawling. Something different, lighter, faster. She looked up. A cloud of insects rose from the southeastern corner of the property. Maybe 200, maybe 300. Hard to count. They moved as a swarm, wings beating in synchronized rhythm, mature grasshoppers. Flying, Linda's stomach dropped. No, not yet, too soon. Ryan came running from the equipment barn, saw the swarm. His face went pale. Mom, I see them. They both stood frozen, watching the grasshoppers descend on a section that hadn't been cleared yet. The insects landed in a writhing mass, immediately began devouring flowers with increased aggression. The damage was immediate. Devastating. By noon, 15% of the eastern acreage was destroyed. Linda and Ryan worked frantically trying to redirect the chicken corridors, trying to salvage what they could. But the mature grasshoppers moved faster than the ground-based birds could follow. Wings changed everything. That evening, Linda sat on the porch steps, elbows on knees, head in hands. Her entire body shook with exhaustion and something close to despair. Ryan emerged from the house, sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. We could speed up the rotation. Push the chickens harder. Linda lifted her head. If we rush, we'll make mistakes. The birds will get exhausted. The system will collapse. Then we lose everything instead of just 15%. Ryan's jaw clenched. So we just accept it? No. Linda's voice was firm despite the fatigue. We accept what we can't control, and we double down on what we can. She stood slowly, wincing as her knee popped. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war. The words sounded confident, strong even. But that night Linda didn't sleep at all. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running numbers in her head, calculating losses, trying to figure out if 15% would be enough to sink them. The math wasn't good, but it wasn't impossible either. She would have to push harder for the remaining sections, squeeze every bit of yield out of the surviving fields. Hope that the quality of what remained was high enough to offset the volume lost. Hope. There was that word again. The most dangerous word in farming. Linda finally drifted off around 3 in the morning. Sleep brought no rest. Just fragmented dreams of grasshoppers and chickens, and her father's calling from somewhere she couldn't reach. She woke at 4:30, got dressed, started coffee, walked outside to face whatever the day would bring, because that was what farmers did. They kept going even when going forward seemed impossible. The next morning, Linda walked the damaged sections alone before Ryan woke. She wanted to see the loss with her own eyes. Without commentary, without distraction. Just her and the broken plants. Stems lay flattened where the grasshoppers had landed. Flowers stripped completely from some stalks. The earth itself looked wounded in the patches where the insects had concentrated their feeding. 15%. She did the math again in her head. Total expected yield from 120 acres of lavender at full production. Approximately 40,000 pounds of dried flowers. 15% loss meant 6,000 pounds gone. At a market price of $31 per pound, that was nearly $200,000 in potential revenue. But the math wasn't that simple, because the remaining quality might be higher than market average. The chemical-free designation might command premium pricing. The story of the farm might create buyer interest that elevated the value beyond standard rates. There were variables in her favor. She just had to play them right. Linda walked back toward the farmhouse as the sun rose. The light caught the dew on the lavender, made the fields sparkle like jewels scattered across velvet. Even damaged, it was beautiful. Even reduced, it was hers. Even uncertain, it was worth fighting for. She poured a second cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, began making a new plan, because that was the other thing farmers did. They adapted constantly, endlessly, without complaint. August 18th brought another crisis. Different this time. The phone rang while Linda was making breakfast. She answered on the third ring. Mrs. Miller. This is Edward Harris from Sequim Valley Bank. Linda's grip tightened on the receiver. Mr. Harris, we need to discuss your loan situation. Silence stretched between them. Linda could hear papers rustling on his end, could picture him sitting behind his massive oak desk, reading her file. Calculating risk, I'm listening. We've been hearing reports about your unconventional approach to pest management this season. Linda's free hand clenched into a fist. My methods are working. Perhaps. Edward's tone remained carefully neutral. But the bank has certain obligations, fiduciary responsibilities. We need assurance that you'll be able to meet your payment obligations come harvest time. Translation. They were scared. Scared she was crazy. Scared her experiment would fail. Scared they'd have to foreclose and explain to shareholders why they'd extended credit to a widow using chickens instead of proven chemical treatments. I'll have the money. I hope that's true, Mrs. Miller. Because if this season fails, he let the sentence hang unfinished. The threat was clear enough. If this season fails, you'll take the farm. Edward cleared his throat uncomfortably. We would explore all options, of course. But yes, foreclosure would likely be necessary. Linda closed her eyes. Anything else? That's all for now. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. Linda stood in the kitchen, receiver still pressed to her ear. Listening to the dial tone, Ryan appeared in the doorway, took one look at his mother's face. What did they say? Linda hung up the phone. They said we need to succeed. She walked past him. Out the door. Into the fields, because standing still meant thinking. And thinking meant acknowledging how close they were to losing everything. Better to keep moving. Always keep moving. She worked through her lunch break. Then through what should have been her afternoon rest. Pushing herself past the pain in her knee, past the fatigue in her shoulders, past the gnawing fear in her stomach. Ryan tried to slow her down. Mom, you need to eat. Later you'll collapse if you don't. Later he finally gave up and worked alongside her, matching her pace, sharing the burden without commentary, just present. Just helping, just refusing to let her face this alone. By dusk, Linda had moved 3 sections of fencing, cleared 2 additional corridors with the chickens, repaired 4 damaged water troughs, inspected every section of the property for further signs of grasshopper maturation. The work didn't make the bank call less terrifying, but it made her feel like she was doing something about it. Something instead of just worrying, something instead of just waiting, something instead of just being afraid. That evening she finally collapsed onto the porch. Ryan brought her dinner on a tray. She ate without tasting any of it. He sat beside her on the steps. What's our plan? Linda chewed, swallowed, took a drink of water. Same plan as before, just with more urgency. Is it going to be enough? It has to be. Ryan looked out at the fields, the chickens settling into their evening roosts, the lavender catching the last orange light. Mom, I have some savings. Not much, about 6,000. But if you need it, Linda set down her fork. No, that's your money, your future. I'm not taking your savings to bail me out of my decisions. They're our decisions. This is our farm. She looked at him, felt her throat tighten. You're a good son, the best son a mother could ask for. But I'm not taking your money. We'll figure this out, together. Without burning your savings, Ryan nodded. Didn't push it, but the offer hung in the air between them, a reminder that family was the one thing that money couldn't buy and chemicals couldn't kill. Late August brought an unexpected visitor, Donald Thomas himself. His truck appeared in Linda's driveway on a Tuesday morning. He climbed out alone. No workers, no assistants. Just Donald in a button-down shirt that looked rumpled, uncharacteristic for him. Linda was repairing a section of fence near the main barn. She saw him approaching, straightened, waited. Donald stopped 10 feet away, removed his sunglasses. Up close, he looked older than Linda remembered. The stress of the season had carved new lines around his mouth. Gray streaks she didn't recall seeing before now threaded heavily through his dark hair. His eyes carried a weariness that money couldn't fix. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Finally, Donald spoke. "I came to apologize." Linda said nothing. "Just watched him. I laughed at you. At the county meeting. That was wrong." The admission seemed to cost him something. His shoulders sagged slightly. The confident posture Linda associated with him nowhere to be seen. "Your fields are still purple." Donald's voice was quiet. "Mine are dying." He gestured vaguely toward the north. "I lost 40% of my contracts. The buyers say my oil is contaminated, worthless. My soil," he trailed off, swallowed hard. "My soil is ruined." Linda leaned against the fence post. "Chemicals do that, I know." Donald looked directly at her. "Could you teach me how to do what you're doing?" Linda studied the man who had mocked her in front of the entire farming community just weeks ago. The man who had smiled while calling her foolish. The man who had represented everything she was fighting against. "Next year," Donald blinked. "Why not now?" "Because I'm not certain I'll succeed yet. Not until September. Not until harvest is finished and sold. Honest, humble, real." Donald nodded slowly. Understanding, fair enough. He turned to leave. Paused, looked back. "Good luck, Linda." First time he'd used her first name. Not Mrs. Miller, just Linda. As though they were equals. Maybe they always had been. Donald climbed back into his truck. Started the engine. Linda watched him drive away. Ryan emerged from the barn. What did he want? Forgiveness, maybe. Hope, definitely. Ryan frowned. "You going to help him?" Linda picked up her tools. "If we survive this season." Yes, because spite had never built anything worth keeping. And destroying others never made you stronger. The conversation with Donald lingered in Linda's mind for days afterward. Something about his humility had affected her, more than she'd expected. For 3 years, he'd represented everything she resented about modern farming. The arrogance, the reliance on chemicals, the refusal to learn from previous generations, the willingness to destroy soil for short-term profits. But standing in her driveway with his shoulders bowed and his eyes asking for help. He'd just been a man who'd made bad choices, a man trying to find a way back. Maybe that was the deeper lesson her father had been trying to teach her all those years ago. That farming wasn't just about respecting the land. It was about respecting the people who worked it, even the ones who got it wrong, especially the ones who got it wrong, because eventually everyone got something wrong. The only question was whether you could find your way back. Donald was trying to find his way back. That had to count for something. August 26th brought the storm. Weather reports had been tracking it for days. A massive system moving in from the Pacific. Sustained winds expected to hit 50 miles per hour. Heavy rain, possible hail. Everything Linda had worked for hung in the balance. High winds could destroy the fence systems. Rain could flood the chicken enclosures. Hail could shred the lavender flowers. She and Ryan worked through the night preparing. Reinforcing fences with extra stakes and wire. Building temporary shelters for the chickens. Covering vulnerable lavender sections with tarps. Michael Johnson returned without being called. He brought 4 other men with him, all retired tradesmen in their late 50s and early 60s. They climbed out of 2 trucks carrying toolboxes, lumber, supplies, reinforcements for whatever Linda needed. For hours they worked alongside Linda and Ryan through the darkness, hammering, sawing, securing, without conversation, without complaint. Just steady, efficient work. At 3 in the morning the first drops began to fall, cold, hard, angry. Within minutes the storm hit with full force. Wind screamed across the valley, tore at the tarps, shook the fence posts, sent anything unsecured tumbling across the fields. Rain came sideways, sheets of water so thick you couldn't see 20 feet ahead. Linda stood on the porch, soaked to the skin, watching her life's work get pummeled by nature's fury. Ryan tried to pull her inside. "Mom, there's nothing we can do out here." But Linda couldn't move, couldn't abandon the fields, couldn't stop watching, so she stood there all night, while the storm raged, while the wind howled, while rain drummed against the roof like machine gun fire, praying, hoping, bargaining with whatever force controlled the weather. "Just let me keep enough. Just let me save the promise. Just let this work." Dawn arrived gray and miserable. The rain had stopped, but clouds still hung low and threatening. Linda walked out into the fields before Ryan was even awake. The damage was significant. 2 fence sections had collapsed completely. Several chicken shelters had blown apart. 10% of the lavender crop had been destroyed by hail. 38 chickens lay dead from exposure and cold. But the majority survived. The fences still stood. The chickens huddled together in the remaining shelters. And the lavender, battered, beaten, bent but alive. Linda knelt in the mud, picked up a broken lavender stem, brought it to her nose. The scent was still strong, still present, still fighting. Just like her, Ryan found his mother 20 minutes later, kneeling in the mud, tears mixing with rain on her face. He thought she was crying from despair. He was wrong. She was crying from relief, because they'd survived. Against everything, against everyone's expectations, against nature itself. They'd survived. Ryan knelt beside her, put his arm around her shoulders. We made it. Linda nodded. Couldn't speak, just nodded. The combined damage from the early grasshopper flight and the storm now totaled 25% of the original crop. A quarter of her expected yield gone, but 3/4 remained. And those 3/4 were now the highest quality lavender in the entire Pacific Northwest. Because everyone else's crops were compromised by chemicals, Linda's wasn't. The market would reward that difference, if she could just find the right buyer, if she could just survive long enough to make it to harvest, if she could just hold on a few more weeks. She stood up slowly, brushed mud from her knees, looked across the fields with renewed determination. The storm was over, the damage was done. Time to rebuild, time to keep moving forward, time to prove that surviving wasn't the same as succeeding. But it was a damn good start. Michael appeared beside her, soaked through, tired, but still standing. What's the plan? Linda took a deep breath. Same plan as yesterday, different obstacles. Same goal? He smiled through his silver beard. That's the right answer. They got to work. Rebuilding what could be rebuilt, salvaging what could be saved, continuing what had to continue, because the harvest was still 3 weeks away. And until then, nothing was guaranteed. September arrived quietly. The worst of the heat had passed. Cool morning fog rolled between the lavender rows again, softening everything. But beneath that calm beauty, fear still lingered across the farming community. Harvest season should have been the happiest time of the year. Instead, farmers whispered nervously about rejected shipments, damaged oil yields, unpaid bank loans. At Miller Lavender Farm, however, the fields remained astonishingly alive. The lavender blossoms stretched across the hills in thick purple waves, untouched by the gray discoloration spreading through neighboring properties. Even the air felt different there, cleaner, richer. Every gust of wind carried a deep floral scent, strong enough to linger in clothing long after someone left. Linda noticed it most in the evenings. After finishing fence adjustments, she would stand at the highest ridge overlooking the farm. The chickens drifted below through the lavender corridors. Hundreds of rust-colored birds moving slowly beneath the setting sun. The system no longer looked strange to her. It looked natural, like the land itself had accepted them. Ryan climbed the ridge one evening carrying 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Linda. We've got visitors coming tomorrow. Linda took the cup. Who? Big company this time. Johnson Botanicals, organic cosmetics out of San Francisco. Linda sipped her coffee. Let the warmth spread through her chest. They'll probably reject us too. Ryan shook his head. I don't think so. I talked to their assistant. They specifically requested to visit us. Said they heard about our methods. Hope flickered in Linda's chest. Small, cautious, dangerous. Because hope could kill you faster than despair, if you let it grow too large. We'll see. Throughout the valley, the contrast between Miller Lavender Farm and neighboring operations had become impossible to ignore. Drivers slowed their vehicles when passing. Other farmers detoured specifically to see the difference. Word had spread far beyond Sequim Valley about the widow who'd used chickens instead of chemicals. But success stories meant nothing without buyers willing to pay for the quality. The lavender in Linda's drying barns was extraordinary. Now she just needed someone willing to recognize that extraordinary thing for what it was. Tomorrow would tell. Tomorrow always told the truth. That night Linda slept better than she had in weeks. Not because she felt confident, but because the time for worry had passed. The work was done. The crop was harvested. Whatever happened next would happen regardless of how much she fretted about it. Sometimes the only path to peace was acceptance. Acceptance that you'd done your best. Acceptance that the rest was beyond your control. Acceptance that the future would arrive whether you were ready or not. September 10th arrived clear and bright. 3 black vehicles rolled into the gravel driveway shortly after sunrise. Expensive, well-maintained. The kind of cars that made farmers nervous. The first person to step out was Patricia Johnson, 42 years old with chestnut hair that fell in waves past her shoulders. Brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore simple clothes, jeans, white button-down, but moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew their worth. Behind her came Stephen Taylor, 50 years old. Sharp features, silver-threaded hair, expensive charcoal suit despite the rural setting. He carried a tablet and moved with corporate precision. Patricia approached Linda directly, extended her hand. "Mrs. Miller, thank you for seeing us." Linda shook her hand, noted the firm grip. "Call me Linda." "Patricia," she gestured to her companion. "This is Stephen Taylor, our CFO." Stephen nodded politely but didn't shake hands, already distracted by his tablet. Patricia turned toward the lavender fields. Her expression shifted. Softened. "May I?" Linda gestured toward the rows. Patricia walked directly into the field. No hesitation, no waiting for permission or guidance. She moved between the lavender plants like someone who understood growing things. Knelt beside a cluster of blooms, took several stems gently between her fingers, rubbed them, closed her eyes, brought them to her nose, breathed deep. The morning breeze moved softly through the field around her. Lavender swayed, purple waves rippling outward. Patricia's face transformed. She smiled. Not a polite corporate smile, something genuine, real, almost emotional. When she opened her eyes, they were bright. This is what lavender is supposed to smell like. Linda felt something loosen in her chest. Some knot of tension she'd been carrying for months. Patricia stood. Walked back toward Linda and Ryan. "We visited 22 farms in the past 2 weeks. Everywhere else I could smell chemicals before even getting out of the car." She looked at Linda. "Your farm smells like flowers, like earth, like life." Stephen approached from where he'd been examining the irrigation system. "I'd like to collect samples, run them through our lab. If they test as well as they smell." He paused, adjusted his glasses. "We'd be very interested in discussing a contract." Linda crossed her arms. "I don't know my final yield yet. Won't until harvest is complete." Patricia nodded. "We understand. But we'd like to schedule another visit. Say 2 weeks? After you've finished bringing in the crop?" "That works." Stephen made notes on his tablet. Patricia walked to the porch, sat down on the steps without being invited. Ryan brought out coffee. They sat there for nearly an hour. Patricia asking questions about the growing process, the chicken system, the soil management. Linda answered honestly, held nothing back. Eventually, Patricia said something that made Linda understand why this woman had come. "My father died from pesticide poisoning." The words hung in the air. William Johnson. He had a small herb farm in Napa Valley, 10 acres. When I was 12, a pest infestation hit. Everyone told him to spray, said it was the only way. Patricia stared into her coffee cup. He did it. 3 applications, heavy doses. Within 2 years, his liver started failing. Doctors said it was chemical exposure, cumulative poisoning. She looked up at Linda. "He died when I was 16. We lost the farm. Lost everything." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Linda just listened. "That's why I started Johnson Botanical. Why I only work with natural ingredients. Why I travel to farms myself instead of sending buyers." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Because I can tell within seconds whether a place respects the earth or just exploits it." She stood, brushed off her jeans. "Your farm respects the earth, Linda. I can feel it." They left shortly after. Linda and Ryan stood in the driveway watching the black cars disappear. That felt different. Ryan finally spoke. Linda nodded. It did. Because Patricia Johnson hadn't just been looking at lavender. She'd been looking for redemption, for proof that farming could still be done right. For evidence that her father's death hadn't been meaningless. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found it in a widow's desperate gamble on 1,200 chickens. September 24th, 2 weeks after harvest began, the black vehicles returned. Patricia Johnson stepped out first. Stephen Taylor followed with his ever-present tablet. Behind them emerged a third person Linda hadn't met before. A younger woman, maybe 30, carrying a leather portfolio and a camera. Patricia approached with that same easy confidence. "Linda. Good to see you again, Patricia." They shook hands like old acquaintances now, not strangers doing business. Stephen was already moving toward the drying barns. All business, no pleasantries. Patricia gestured to the younger woman. "This is Jennifer Hayes, our quality assurance director." Jennifer smiled. Nervous energy. The kind of person who talked with their hands. "I've been following your farm story. It's remarkable what you've accomplished." Linda shifted her weight off her bad knee. "I just did what needed doing. That's exactly what makes it remarkable." Stephen emerged from the main barn. His expression was unreadable. He tapped something into his tablet, made Linda's stomach clench. Here it comes, the rejection. The polite explanation about why her lavender didn't meet their standards. Stephen looked up. Oil concentration is 42% above regional average. Linda blinked. What? Your lavender. Stephen adjusted his glasses. The essential oil content tests at 42% higher than typical Sequim Valley lavender. And there's zero chemical residue. Not trace amounts. Zero. He showed Linda the tablet screen. Numbers and graphs that meant nothing to her. In 20 years of testing suppliers, I've never seen results like this. Your lavender is exceptional. Patricia was smiling. That genuine smile from before. We'd like to purchase your entire harvest. The words hit Linda like a physical blow. She actually took a step back. The entire harvest? Every pound you're willing to sell. Stephen swiped to a new screen. We're prepared to offer $87 per pound. The world tilted. Linda heard the number but couldn't process it. $87 almost per pound. The current market price was $31. This was nearly triple. Ryan appeared from the equipment barn. Took one look at his mother's face. Hurried over. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Patricia's voice was warm. We're making an offer. Stephen turned the tablet so Ryan could see. Ryan's eyes went wide, his mouth opened, closed. Opened again. That's more than generous. Patricia finished. Your mother has something special here. Our customers will pay premium prices for guaranteed organic lavender of this quality. Stephen pulled up another document. We'd also like to propose a 5-year contract. Annual purchases. Price adjusted for inflation. Guaranteed minimum volumes. Linda's knees felt weak. She reached out, grabbed the porch railing. I need to think about this. Patricia nodded immediately. Of course, take all the time you need. We're staying in Port Angeles tonight. Call us when you're ready. They left their contact information, drove away. Linda and Ryan stood in the driveway, silent, stunned. Finally Ryan spoke. Mom, do you know what this means? Linda's hand shook as she reached for the porch rail again. It means we might actually make it. That night Linda couldn't sleep. But this time for different reasons. She lay in bed running calculations, trying to estimate her total yield, multiplying by 87. The numbers were staggering. Enough to pay off the bank completely, enough to repair everything that needed fixing, enough to expand operations, enough to finally breathe. At 2 in the morning she gave up pretending to sleep, got dressed, walked outside. The September night was cool, clear. Stars scattered across the black sky like thrown diamonds. Linda walked through the lavender rows. The plants were mostly bare now, stripped for harvest, but their scent lingered, embedded in the soil itself. She found herself at the spot where she'd released the chickens that first morning. Remembered the fear, the doubt, the absolute certainty that she was probably ruining everything. And somehow, against all logic, against everyone's expectations, it had worked. Linda knelt, put her hand on the ground, felt the earth cool against her palm. We did it, Richard. We kept the promise. Her voice cracked. We kept the farm. She stayed there for a long time, kneeling in the dark, letting 3 years of accumulated tension finally drain out of her body. When she finally stood, her knee protested loudly. But Linda barely noticed, because for the first time since Richard died, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. The next morning, Linda called Patricia. We accept your offer. 3 days later, Stephen Taylor arrived with contracts. 70 pages of legal language that Linda read carefully. Michael sat with her, helped translate the corporate speak into plain English. Everything looked legitimate. Fair even. Linda signed. Patricia called that evening. Welcome to the Johnson Botanicals family, Linda. Thank you for believing in us. Patricia's voice softened. You gave me something I'd been looking for a long time. Proof that the way my father farmed wasn't wrong. That natural methods can still work. That we haven't destroyed everything. Linda understood. Some debts couldn't be measured in money. Patricia cleared her throat. Became businesslike again. Our trucks will arrive Monday to collect the harvest. Payment will transfer within 24 hours of receipt. Understood. Oh, and Linda? We have another proposition. We're looking to expand our supplier network, connect with other farms using sustainable methods. Would you be interested in consulting? Teaching your techniques? Linda's first instinct was to refuse. She wasn't a teacher, wasn't an expert. Just a farmer who'd gotten desperate enough to try something different. But then she thought about Donald Thomas, about Jim Carver, about all the other farmers who'd started asking questions. Stopping by the property, watching the chickens work. I'd need to think about it. Take your time. The offer stands. They said goodbye. Linda sat in the kitchen, staring at the signed contracts on the table. Ryan walked in. Grabbed a glass of water. You going to do it? The consulting thing? Linda drummed her fingers on the table. I don't know. Feels presumptuous. Like I'm some kind of expert when really I just got lucky. Ryan sat down across from her. It wasn't luck, Mom. You studied. You planned. You worked harder than anyone I've ever seen. And you trusted your instincts when everyone said you were wrong. He leaned forward. That's not luck. That's courage. Linda looked at her son. When had he gotten so wise? When did you grow up? Ryan grinned. Around the time you released 1,200 chickens into a lavender field and refused to admit it might be insane. Linda laughed. Actually laughed. First real laugh in months. It felt good. Monday morning arrived with fog thick as cotton. The Johnson Botanicals trucks appeared through the mist like ships emerging from clouds. 2 massive semi-trailers. Professional. Efficient, the loading crew moved with practiced precision, carefully transferring the dried lavender bundles from Linda's barns to the climate-controlled trailers. Patricia had come personally to oversee the collection. She walked through the barns, running her hands over the hanging flowers. Breathing deep, this is going to make extraordinary products. Linda stood watching her life's work get loaded onto trucks. Part of her wanted to hold on, keep the lavender, proof that she'd succeeded. But the rational part knew that crops had no value until they were sold. Beauty didn't pay bank loans. By noon both trailers were full. The crew secured the loads. The drivers climbed into their cabs. Patricia shook Linda's hand one final time. You'll have payment confirmation by tomorrow evening. Thank you. Patricia paused before getting into her car. Thank you. You reminded me why I started this company, why any of this matters. Then she was gone. Linda and Ryan stood in the empty driveway. The fog was lifting, revealing clear blue sky above. Now what? Ryan asked. Linda smiled. Now we wait. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Linda checked her phone every 10 minutes, refreshed her email constantly, paced the house like a caged animal. Ryan finally forced her to go outside. You're driving me crazy. Go check on the chickens or something. Linda walked to the eastern fields. The chickens had settled into their expanded enclosure. Content, well-fed, oblivious to the role they'd played in saving everything. Ash lay in the shade, getting old now. His muzzle had gone completely white, but his tail wagged when Linda approached. She sat beside him, scratched behind his ears. Good dog. You did good. Ash's tail thumped harder. Linda's phone buzzed. IM notification. She pulled it out, heart hammering. Johnson Botanicals, wire transfer confirmation. She opened the attachment. The number made her gasp. $287,400. Linda stared at the screen. Read it again. Read it a third time. The number didn't change. She stood, walked back toward the house. Faster. Then running despite her knee, Ryan. He met her at the door. Saw her face, what? Linda showed him the phone. Ryan's eyes went wide. He grabbed the phone. Look closer. Is this real? It's real. Ryan sat down hard on the porch steps. We're going to make it. Linda sat beside him. Yeah, we are. They sat there together, mother and son, watching the afternoon light paint the empty lavender fields gold. 2 days later, Linda drove to Sequim Valley Bank, walked into Edward Harris's office without an appointment. He looked up. Surprised, Mrs. Miller? I wasn't expecting you. Linda placed a cashier's check on his desk. Full payment. Principal and interest. Edward picked up the check. His eyebrows rose. This is every penny I owe, plus early payment penalties. We're square. Edward leaned back in his chair. Studied Linda with new respect. I heard about your methods. Thought it was a joke at first. Most people did. I was wrong to doubt you. Linda stood. Yes, you were. She turned to leave. Mrs. Miller? Linda paused. You've proven something important. That there are alternatives. That farmers don't have to choose between profit and principle. Linda looked back at him. I just did what my father taught me. Trust the land. Respect the earth. The rest follows. She walked out, free of debt for the first time in 15 years. A truck appeared on the road, slowed, turned into the driveway. Donald Thomas. He climbed out. Approached cautiously. Linda stood. Donald. Linda. He nodded to Ryan. Ryan. Awkward silence. Donald cleared his throat. I heard Johnson Botanicals bought your entire harvest. News traveled fast in small farming communities. They did. Must have been a good price. Linda waited. Let him get to whatever he'd come to say. Donald took off his hat, turned it in his hands. I lost 60% of my operation this year. The buyers rejected most of my crop. The soil is ruined. It'll take years to recover. He looked directly at Linda. You were right. I was wrong. And I'm here to ask if you'd teach me how to do it your way. Linda studied him. The proud man reduced to asking for help. It couldn't have been easy. What changed? Donald's laugh was bitter. Reality changed. I can't keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. That's the definition of insanity. He put his hat back on. I want to learn. If you're willing to teach, Linda glanced at Ryan. He nodded slightly. She turned back to Donald. Okay, relief flooded Donald's face. Thank you, but we do this properly. No shortcuts, no half measures. You commit to the full transition, or you don't start at all, whatever it takes. Then come back Thursday morning. 7 o'clock. Bring a notebook. Donald nodded. Started to leave. Turned back. I really am sorry. For laughing. For not taking you seriously. Linda's expression softened slightly. Apology accepted. Now we move forward. After Donald left, Ryan whistled low. Donald Thomas asking for help. Never thought I'd see that. Linda smiled. Desperate times make humble men of us all. Thursday morning, Donald appeared at exactly 7. Notebook in hand. Pen ready, Linda took him through the entire system. Step by step, explaining the chicken rotation, the fence corridors, the timing windows, the soil management. Donald asked intelligent questions, took detailed notes. Didn't once interrupt or argue. At noon, Linda called a break. They sat on the porch. Drinking water? This is going to cost me more upfront than chemicals, Donald observed. It will, but long-term? Long-term, your soil recovers. Your lavender quality improves, your buyers come back, and you stop poisoning yourself and your land. Donald nodded slowly. Worth it then. Over the next 2 weeks, other farmers started appearing. First 1 or 2, then half a dozen, all asking questions, all wanting to learn. Linda found herself teaching daily, explaining, demonstrating, answering concerns. Word spread beyond Sequim Valley. A farmer from Oregon called, then one from Idaho, a small organic cooperative in Montana. Patricia's consulting offer suddenly made sense. This wasn't just about Linda's farm anymore. It was about changing how an entire region approached agriculture. One chicken at a time. Winter arrived cold and quiet. Linda spent December expanding the chicken coops, building infrastructure for next season, planning improvements. Ryan worked alongside her, never complained, never questioned. One evening over dinner, he made an announcement. I want to stay. Linda looked up from her plate. Stay? On the farm. Permanently. I want to build on what we've created, grow it. Make it something even bigger. Linda's throat tightened. You don't have to stay for me. I'm not staying for you. Ryan's voice was firm. I'm staying for me. For what this represents. For what we can build together. He leaned forward. Grandpa started this. You and Dad grew it. Now it's my turn. Linda reached across Aldous, took his hand. Your father would be proud. I hope so. They sat in silence. The kitchen warm. The farm quiet outside. This was family, this was legacy, this was enough. In November, Michael Johnson brought difficult news. His health was failing. Heart problems. The doctors said he had maybe a year. Linda took it hard. Michael was the last connection to Richard. The last piece of family she had besides Ryan. I don't want you to be sad. Michael's voice was weak but firm. I got to see you succeed. Got to watch you save the farm. That's enough for anyone. Linda gripped his hand. You helped save it too. Nah. I just hammered some nails. You did the real work, he coughed, caught his breath. Richard told me once that marrying you was the smartest thing he ever did. Said you were tougher than anyone he'd ever met. Linda's eyes burned. He was wrong. I'm not tough. I'm just stubborn. Michael laughed, then coughed again. Same thing. Michael died in early December, peacefully. At home, the funeral was well attended. Farmers from across the valley came to pay respects. At the graveside, Linda stood between Ryan and Donald. The three of them united by loss, by farming, by the land that demanded everything and gave back just enough to keep you hoping. After everyone left, Linda stayed, standing beside Michael's grave. Thank you, for believing, for helping, for being there when we needed you most. The wind moved through the trees, carried her words away. March 1986 arrived with new growth. The first lavender shoots pushed through the cold soil, tiny green promises of summer to come. Linda stood in the fields, watching life return. 7 vehicles were parked in her driveway, farmers who'd come for the morning's workshop. She'd started offering monthly training sessions, teaching the techniques, sharing the knowledge. Donald Thomas was there, along with Jim Carver, a dozen others. Linda walked them through the spring preparation process, explained timing, answered questions. She'd become a teacher despite never intending to be one. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes you didn't choose your path chose you. The summer of 1986 brought validation. 23 farms in Sequim Valley were now using chicken-based pest management. Numbers varied, methods adapted to different situations, but the principle remained: natural solutions, patient application, respect for the land. Donald Thomas's farm was recovering. His soil showed dramatic improvement. His lavender was blooming again. He stopped by one evening, brought a bottle of whiskey. I wanted to thank you properly. They sat on Linda's porch, watching the sunset, sipping whiskey. You didn't just teach me farming techniques. Donald's voice was quiet. You taught me humility. Taught me that being successful doesn't mean being right. Linda swirled the whiskey in her glass. We all learn that eventually. Some just take longer than others. Donald smiled. Some of us are slower learners than others. They clinked glasses, drank to second chances, to new beginnings, to wisdom earned through failure. The autumn of 1986 brought another exceptional harvest. Linda's lavender yield increased by 30%. Quality remained outstanding. Johnson Botanicals increased their contract value. The farm was thriving, more than thriving, flourishing. In December, Linda sat down with Ryan. Spread out the financial statements. We made $420,000 this year. Ryan whistled. After expenses and expansion costs, we're net positive by over $100,000. Linda leaned back in her chair. We're actually successful. You sound surprised. I am. I spent 3 years just trying to survive. Success feels strange, Ryan smiled. Better get used to it. We're just getting started. He was right. Applications for spring workshops were already coming in. Farmers from Oregon, Idaho, Montana, even California. The movement had grown beyond anything Linda imagined, all because she'd been desperate enough, stubborn enough, foolish enough to trust 1,200 chickens with everything she owned. That evening, Linda walked to the highest hill, her ritual now. Watching the sun set over the farm, the lavender fields stretched out below, purple waves waiting to bloom, chicken coops dotted the landscape, everything organized, efficient, alive. This was what she'd fought for. Not just the land, not just the promise to Richard, but proof that doing things right mattered, that patience beat panic, that nature worked better than chemicals, that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. A voice spoke behind her. Beautiful evening. Linda turned. Ryan stood there, hands in pockets. Smiling. It is. He moved beside her. I was thinking, what if we wrote a book, documented everything we've learned, made it available for anyone who wants to try? Linda considered. People would pay for that information. So we give it away, make it free, put it online. Let anyone who wants it have access. Linda looked at her son. When had he become so wise? Your father would have loved that idea. Then let's do it. They stood together, mother and son, watching darkness fall, the farm quiet, the chickens settling in for the night, the land resting, healing, growing. And in that moment, Linda Miller understood something fundamental. Success wasn't measured in money, or recognition, or proving doubters wrong. Success was measured in soil recovering, in method spreading, in families saved, in promises kept. And in that measurement, Linda Miller was wealthy beyond imagination. Maybe the real miracle was never the chickens. It was the quiet faith of one woman who chose patience over panic, who chose nature over shortcuts, who stood alone when everyone laughed. She walked down the hill, toward the farmhouse, toward home. Behind her, the farm settled into darkness. The chickens roosted, the lavender rested, the soil breathed, everything alive, everything growing, everything exactly as it should be. June 1987, Seattle Convention Center. 2,000 farmers packed into a ballroom. Linda Miller stood backstage. Her hands trembled. Patricia Johnson touched her arm gently. You're going to be fine. I'm not a public speaker. I'm a farmer who used chickens. Exactly. That's why they want to hear from you. The introduction played over the loudspeakers. Linda Miller, the woman who saved Sequim Valley, the woman who proved sustainable agriculture works. She walked to the podium. The crowd was enormous. Faces blurred together, all watching, waiting. Linda gripped the microphone. I don't have a degree in agriculture. I don't have fancy credentials. What I have is 1,200 chickens. And desperation. Someone in the audience laughed. My husband died. My debt was crushing. Everyone told me to spray chemicals like everyone else. So I did what my father taught me. I trusted the land, I trusted nature, and I used birds instead of poison. She paused. Let that sink in. 3 years later, my farm survives. Theirs are dying. The difference isn't intelligence, it's patience, it's respect, it's understanding that shortcuts always cost more than they save. The room was silent. Every single one of you can do this. Not maybe, not someday, now, today. Your soil, your families, your future depends on one decision. To do it right instead of doing it fast. She stepped back from the podium. The crowd erupted, stood, applauded. Some people were crying. Patricia was grinning from the wings. I told you. After the speech, a man approached. Mid-50s, expensive suit, government ID badge, Michael Ross, Department of Agriculture, Assistant Director of Sustainable Farming Initiatives. Mrs. Miller. That was extraordinary. Linda shook his hand. It was clammy. Anxious, thank you. We're developing a federal program, supporting farmers who transition away from chemical dependency. We want you involved, as a consultant, as a face, as proof that this works. Linda studied him. What do you get out of it? Michael didn't hesitate. Legitimacy. Your story carries weight, political weight. Environmental groups love it. Farmers believe it. If we can get your endorsement, the program gets funding. Real funding. Millions. Patricia materialized at Linda's shoulder. What kind of involvement are we talking about? Speaking engagements, media appearances, helping design the curriculum, certifying farms that meet sustainable standards. Linda's chest tightened. I'd lose control. You'd gain influence. Michael countered. Much bigger stage. Linda excused herself, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the edge of the sink control. That was the issue. For 3 years she'd made every decision, set every standard, controlled every outcome. Now people wanted pieces of her, wanted her name, wanted her story. But if she let go, if she shared control, what if it all fell apart? August 1987, a black sedan pulled into Linda's driveway one afternoon. Different from any car that had visited before. Tinted windows, government plates that weren't actually government, just expensive corporate registration designed to look official. A man stepped out. Charles Mitchell, 50 years old, tall, lean, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Linda's first truck. He approached the porch with measured steps. Mrs. Miller. May I have a few minutes of your time? Linda was on the porch shelling peas. She didn't look up. Who's asking? Charles Mitchell. Greenvale Crops. We're a leading agricultural technology company. Linda set down her bowl. Now she looked up. Charles smiled. It was the kind of smile that looked practiced. Like he'd worked on it in mirrors. We've been following your work with great interest. Linda waited. Charles continued. We'd like to discuss a partnership opportunity. Greenvale is developing what we call hybrid solutions, combining traditional pest management with newer organic approaches. The best of both worlds. You sell pesticides, among other things. I don't work with pesticide companies. Charles's smile didn't change. But something behind his eyes shifted. Mrs. Miller. With respect. The market for purely organic agriculture is limited. The future is hybrid approaches. Companies like ours are leading that future. Your involvement would lend credibility to a much-needed evolution in agricultural practice. Linda stood up. Slowly, Mr. Mitchell. I lost 25% of my crop to grasshoppers 2 years ago. I lost no soil. I lost no microbes. I lost no honeybees. I lost no birds. My neighbors who used your hybrid solutions lost everything underground that mattered. And then they lost their contracts because their crop was contaminated. Charles started to speak. She held up her hand. I'm not finished. He closed his mouth. You're here because the chemical companies are losing market share to organic methods. And you need someone like me. A voice the farmers trust. To say that maybe chemicals aren't so bad after all. That maybe hybrid is okay. That maybe we don't need to actually change anything. Charles studied her. You're more political than I expected. I'm not political. I'm a farmer who watched her neighbors poison themselves and their land. I'm a widow who saved her farm with chickens. And I'm a teacher trying to share what works. And what we're offering would help you reach more people. It would help you sell more poison. Charles set down his briefcase. Mrs. Miller. I'd like to make this clear. We're offering you a consulting fee. Substantial. 6 figures annually. Plus equity. Plus speaking engagements. Plus media support. No, you haven't heard the numbers. I don't need to. Charles's smile tightened slightly. You're a businesswoman. You understand value. I understand value. I also understand betrayal. What you're asking would betray everyone who trusted what I taught them. Charles picked up his briefcase. I'll leave my card. In case you reconsider, don't bother. He walked back to his car, slid into the leather seat, started the engine. Before backing out, he rolled down the window. Mrs. Miller, you should know, we have other options. This was the friendly approach. There will be others. Then he drove away. Linda stood on the porch, watching the sedan disappear down the gravel road, knowing this wasn't over. September 1987, the Lavender Institute opened formally. Susan Bradford from Washington State University was executive director, 45 years old, sharp, brilliant, the kind of academic who actually cared about practical application. Donald Thomas handled operations. Patricia Johnson provided funding connections. Linda served as chief agricultural advisor. It was supposed to feel triumphant. Instead, it felt chaotic. The first cohort of farmers arriving for training numbered 47, from 7 states, bringing 7 different approaches to the same fundamental technique, Susan stood in her new office surrounded by applications. We need standards, guidelines, certifications. Otherwise, every farm is doing something different and we can't guarantee quality. Linda frowned at the paperwork. Standards means rules. Rules means less flexibility. What works in Washington might not work in Oregon. Then we create regional standards, environmental factors, soil composition, climate zones. We make it scientific. Linda's knee ached. She'd been standing for hours explaining basics to farmers who asked the same questions over and over. This is too big. We're moving too fast. Susan set down her pen. You want to slow down? Tell them to wait? Tell the farmers showing up hoping to save their farms that we're not ready yet? Linda didn't answer, because Susan was right. This had moved beyond Linda's control months ago. She just hadn't wanted to admit it. Donald walked into the office, carrying a stack of papers. We've got another 15 applications from this morning, and 3 calls from journalists, and a request from the governor's office about a tour. Linda looked at the papers. The governor wants to use us as an example of innovative agriculture, wants to bring media. Tell him no. Susan and Donald exchanged glances. Linda, we can't just say no to the governor. Why not? We're not a political prop. We're an agricultural education program. Political support means funding. Funding means we can help more farmers. Linda rubbed her temples. This was the part she'd worried about. The compromises, the trade-offs, the slow erosion of what made the original work pure. Fine, he can visit, but no media circus, no photo ops, just real farmers explaining real techniques. If he wants a show, he can go somewhere else. Donald nodded. Made a note. Susan smiled slightly. You see? You're already thinking like an executive. I'm thinking like someone who doesn't want this to become exactly what we're trying to replace. November 1987, Donald Thomas appeared at Linda's property one evening. He looked thinner, older, defeated. He found Linda in the equipment barn checking supplies. I'm closing the operation. Linda turned. What? My farm. I'm selling the land. Closing the business. Linda set down her tools. Why? Your soil is recovering. You're making progress. Donald leaned against a support beam. I can't compete. Johnson Botanicals pays you premium prices. The institute keeps expanding. You're becoming a household name. Meanwhile, I'm just another farmer trying to survive. He looked at Linda directly. I'm too proud to stay small, too poor to stay competitive, and too tired to keep fighting. Linda felt something crack inside her chest. Donald. No. There has to be another way. There is. Donald straightened. I want to work for you, full-time, help run the institute, not as a farmer anymore, as an administrator. Someone to manage the growing pains. Linda blinked. I can pay you, not a lot. But enough, that's not the point. The point is I don't have anything else. No other path. You saved my life once. You're giving me a second chance. Ryan materialized from where he'd been organizing supplies. When do you start? Donald looked surprised. Just like that? Ryan shrugged. My mom's learned that second chances matter. That people can change. That redemption is possible. Donald's eyes got wet. He turned away. I'll start Monday. After Donald left, Linda sat on a hay bale, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Ryan sat beside her. That was a big decision, was it? Hiring the man who used to mock you to help run your organization? Linda almost smiled. It wasn't a decision. It was just the right thing to do. Ryan nodded. Dad would be proud of you. Linda looked at him. Your father would have hired Donald a year ago. I'm just catching up. The Thanksgiving of 1987 was different. The table in Linda's farmhouse stretched end to end. 30 people, farmers, teachers, researchers, dreamers. Susan Bradford sat next to Patricia Johnson. They were debating soil microbe composition like old friends. Donald Thomas carved the turkey, his hands steady, his smile genuine. Ryan poured wine, made toasts, told stories that made people laugh. Michael Ross had sent a letter, couldn't attend, but confirmed the federal program was moving forward. Funding approved. Training centers established across 3 states. Someone raised a glass to Linda Miller, who saved more than a farm, who saved a community. Everyone looked at her. Linda shifted uncomfortably. I didn't do this alone. Michael helped. Susan designed the curriculum. Donald manages operations. Patricia provides resources. This works because of all of us, not because of me. Patricia smiled. That's the most dangerous thing you could say. How so? Because now you're replaceable. If you're the only one who matters and you disappear, everything falls apart. But if credit is shared, knowledge is distributed, then the movement survives. Linda hadn't considered that. The burden of being irreplaceable versus the liberation of being part of something larger. After dinner, Linda stood on the porch alone. The November cold bit at exposed skin. Stars scattered overhead like promises. Ryan joined her an hour later. Big changes coming. Linda nodded. The institute is growing faster than I can manage. The federal program wants more engagement. Johnson Botanicals wants to open regional distribution centers. Michael Ross wants me to testify before Congress next spring. You sound terrified. I am. I was comfortable being a farmer, fighting one battle at a time. Now it's like standing in the middle of a tidal wave. Ryan leaned against the porch railing. You don't have to do everything. If I don't, who will? Susan, Donald, Patricia. Me eventually. Linda looked at her son. You're ready to take this on? Not yet. But I will be. That's why you have to teach me. While you're still here. While you still have control, the word control hung between them. Because Linda was learning that control was illusion. You could only guide, influence, direct, but ultimately the world did what it wanted. December 1987, Edward Harris requested a meeting. Linda walked into Sequim Valley Bank with trepidation. The last time she'd been in this office, she'd been laying down a cashier's check. Walking out free of debt for the first time in 15 years. But the building still made her uncomfortable. Edward rose from behind his massive oak desk, extended his hand, Mrs. Miller. Thank you for coming. She shook his hand, sat across from him. Edward folded his hands carefully. I was wrong about you, completely wrong. I doubted your methods because they didn't fit conventional financial models. He pulled open a drawer, removed a file. Since you paid off your loan, I've tracked the financial outcomes of other farmers you've consulted with. 43 farms, all converted to sustainable methods. All profitable, all surviving the downturn that's hurting chemical-dependent operations. Edward closed the file. I want to create a sustainable agriculture lending program. Special interest rates, extended terms, flexible collateral. For farmers willing to transition away from chemicals. Linda's throat tightened. You want my endorsement, I want your partnership. You're the reason I'm doing this. You proved that sustainable agriculture isn't just morally right, it's financially sound. Linda stood, walked to the window, looked out over the town below. How much capital? We're targeting 10 million. Over 5 years. Could help 500 farms. She turned back. Okay. Edward looked surprised. That easy? Nothing's been easy. But this matters. If we can make sustainable farming financially accessible, make it a legitimate choice for desperate farmers, everything else follows. Edward stood, offered his hand again. This time they both understood what the gesture meant, not business. Partnership. Trust. As Linda left the bank, she thought about how many people had asked her forgiveness in the past year. Donald Michael, before he died. Now Edward. 3 people who doubted her, mocked her, threatened her. All 3 had returned, asking for ways to make it right. Maybe that was its own kind of victory. Maybe people weren't entirely irredeemable. Maybe the world could change, one conversation at a time. End of December 1987, New Year's Eve. Linda stood on her hill alone. The habit of 3 years. The ritual of solitude. Ryan climbed up to join her, then Susan, then Donald, then Patricia. They stood silently, watching the last minutes of 1987 dissolve. Next year will be different. Patricia's voice cut through the cold. How so? Johnson Botanicals is opening a production facility near here. We're hiring, creating jobs, growing infrastructure around sustainable farming. Linda nodded. She'd heard rumors. Susan added quietly, the institute is expanding to 6 regional centers. We're bringing in specialists, expanding beyond lavender into multiple crops. Donald didn't speak, just nodded agreement. Ryan put his arm around his mother. Everything we built is becoming something bigger than any of us. Linda looked at the fields below, at the darkness broken only by starlight, at the land that had demanded everything and given just enough back. Do you know what terrifies me most? She asked the group. Nobody answered. That I'll lose it. That in trying to help everyone I'll ruin what we have here. That this place will become just another corporate operation with my name on it? Patricia stepped closer. Then you need to do something counterintuitive. What? Trust that the people who helped you build this actually understand what it means. Trust that we won't let it become corrupted, Susan added. And when we do inevitably make mistakes, when the institute takes a wrong turn or a farm gets certified that shouldn't be, you address it. You speak up. You don't just hand everything over and pretend you have no responsibility. Linda turned to face them all. You're saying I have to stay involved even though staying involved means less control. Exactly. Donald's voice was calm. That's the paradox of leadership. The more you try to control everything, the less actual control you have. But if you guide, if you teach, if you trust others to carry the vision forward, he paused, then the movement becomes bigger than you could ever make it alone. The countdown began from the convention center in Seattle, broadcast on every radio, every television. 10 seconds to midnight, 10 seconds to 1988, 10 seconds to a future Linda couldn't predict or control. 9-8, Linda thought about Richard, about Michael, about all the people who'd believed in her before she believed in herself. 7-6, she thought about Charles Mitchell's thin smile, about Greenvale crops, about the forces arrayed against sustainable agriculture. 5-4, she thought about the 500 farmers who might get loans, the 500 families who might survive, the 500 pieces of land that might be healed. 3, 2, 1. The bell tolled midnight. Ryan hugged his mother. Donald and Patricia shook hands. Susan raised a bottle of wine to 1988. To the movement. To whatever comes next, they drank. The clock turned over. 1987 became memory. 1988 became possibility. Infinite, terrifying, full of potential for success or catastrophic failure. As they walked back down the hill toward the farmhouse, Linda looked back one more time. The farm glowed under starlight, the chicken coops, the drying barns, the fencing systems that had seemed impossible 3 years ago. But the view wasn't the same anymore, because now she could see beyond the property line, see the fields belonging to the farmers she'd taught, see the institute buildings, see the network of operations spreading outward, see a movement, not just a farm, not just her story, but something that had taken on life of its own, something that didn't belong to Linda Miller anymore. Something that belonged to everyone foolish enough to believe agriculture could be done differently. She felt Ryan's presence beside her. Scared? Terrified. Good. That means it matters. They walked together toward the lights of the farmhouse, toward the people waiting inside, toward a future that Linda couldn't control no matter how hard she tried. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the real victory wasn't building something. It was building something big enough that it no longer needed you to survive. Except, there was still the small matter of Charles Mitchell. Still the question of what Greenvale crops would do when they realized sustainable agriculture couldn't be stopped by charm or threats. Still the unknown variable. Still the danger brewing in corners Linda couldn't see. But that was a problem for 1988. For now, Linda Miller let herself rest, let herself celebrate, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had actually changed something. The morning of January 1st arrived clear and cold. Linda woke before dawn. Out of habit more than necessity, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window watching the sky lighten over the lavender fields. The fields slept under thin frost. The chickens stirred in their warm coops. The farm prepared for another day, another season, another chapter. She thought about everything that had happened in 3 years. From standing alone at the county meeting being laughed at, to standing on a stage in Seattle being applauded by 2,000 farmers. From owing $285,000 to building a movement worth millions. From being completely alone in her grief to being surrounded by people who shared her vision. Linda took a deep breath. The coffee was hot in her hands. The future was uncertain. The work was just beginning. Someone asked her once, "Are you afraid? Afraid that everything you built will collapse?" And she had answered every day. But fear was never a reason to stop. Fear was just a reason to keep going. Because if you stopped, if you turned around, if you gave up, then all of this would have meant nothing. And Linda couldn't allow that, not when so many people were watching, not when so much land needed healing, not when so many farmers needed to know there was another way. Outside, the chickens began to stir. Soon Ryan would wake. Soon the workday would begin. Soon another chapter in a story that had grown far beyond one widow and her stubborn chickens would begin to write itself. Linda Miller drank her coffee, watched the sun come up, and got ready to keep going, because that's what farmers did. Through grasshoppers and storms and chemical companies and federal programs and personal loss and unexpected success. They got up, they went to work, they kept the promise. And somewhere out there, somewhere in offices Linda couldn't see, Charles Mitchell was making phone calls, planning his next move, because Greenvale crops didn't accept defeat easily, and the war for the future of American agriculture had only just begun. But that was a story for another day, a story for tomorrow, a story Linda Miller would face with the same quiet courage that had brought her this far, one chicken at a time, one farmer at a time, one season at a time. 4 of her.